This right here is my Bombtrack Beyond Plus. Well, you can remove the plus from that title, as about a year ago I switched them tyres to 2.6 inch from the 3 inch tyres that were on this bike before, making this Bombtrack Beyond not so plus bike. So in this video we are going to take a look at how I have gotten on with making this change after a year of riding. When changing this bike over from the 3 inch tyres to the 2.6 inch Max's Icons, one thing that does happen is that the bottom bracket is lowered. Now the Bombtrack has a fairly high bottom bracket height anyway, and at most it's been lowered by about 3mm. So it hasn't caused me any problems when riding, and honestly I can say I can't tell the difference in height when actually riding this bike. I guess you could look at this as a slight negative, as it will make riding in rutty or technical situations a bit more likely that you might get pedal strike. But with it being such little difference in height and the bike having that high bottom bracket height anyway, I can't say I get any more pedal strike with this setup over having the 3 inch tyres. So it's a non-issue really, but worth mentioning. The mud clearance is something we need to talk about on this bike, and if you buy this bike off the shelf, it will come with a 45mm internal rim width on the front, and on the back a 40mm internal rim width, and there is a reason for this, and Bombtrack will say it's faster, it's more aerodynamic, and it creates less rolling resistance by making that 3 inch tyre closer to a 2-inch tyre when it's on the narrower rim. And while that is all probably true, there is another reason why they don't spec this bike with a true 3 inch tyre on the back, and that is because if they did, it would leave absolutely no room for mud clearance. Even with the 3 inch tyre on the narrower rim, that mud clearance on the rear of this bike, the way this bike is sold, is just not the greatest. So when I changed the tyres on this bike to the smaller 2.6 inch Icons, I also changed the rims both to 35mm internal rims, the I-35 WTB Com Tough. Now here is where I'm at. This bike frame, at least in the rear, is how this bike should come, with the amount of mud clearance. With the I-35 rims and the 2.6 inch Icon is the bare minimum of mud clearance that I would want on a bike like this. Granted, most of my rides are in wet, muddy trails, so mud clearance is obviously quite important for me, and the standard rim tyre combo shouldn't cause any problems if you are riding on the drier trails. However, I do believe this frame is actually suited best for the 2.6 inch tyres after a year of use. Now the front fork obviously has loads of clearance even with the original rim and tyre combo, so putting a smaller rim and tyre on the front has meant you could park a literal bus in the space I have for mud clearance on the front, which in my eyes isn't a bad thing. In my eyes, like I said, I ride a lot of muddy trails and conditions, so more the merrier. So overall I am much happier with the 2.6 inch tyres on this bike over the 3 inch tyres when it comes to tyre and mud clearance. Being a hardtail bike, the 3 inch tyres of course help with the comfort on the bike, especially rolling over the rougher terrain. So when I was making the change to the smaller tyres, I was aware of that. I was aware that I might be sacrificing a bit of comfort on the bike, and while that is probably ever so slightly true, the 2.6 inch tyres offer plenty of volume that allow you to still run the tyres at lower pressures. to help take the sting out of them rough and rocky trails. With a 3-inch tyre, it would just roll over anything and everything pretty much, and with the 2.6-inch tyres, that's still pretty much the case, but occasionally you might find yourself having to find the slightly smoother line once in a while, but overall it's really not affected the comfort of this bike in any meaningful way. I won't say it's any more comfortable, but I can't say it's any worse than before. Ultimately, the size difference between the 3-inch tyre and the 2.6-inch tyre isn't enough to affect the comfort of the ride of this bike, but it does change the handling. I mentioned this in the original video I made when I made these changes on this bike, but the biggest noticeable difference from changing this bike to the smaller tyres was just how more playful and fun the bike became. Although it hasn't made a huge difference in comfort on the bike, it has made the bike quite a bit different in the way it feels on the trail. The steering feels a bit more reactive, a bit faster. The bike in some ways is less stable. Now, it's not that the bike is unstable, you can still cruise along happily. It's just that when you do get into them rough, technical trails, the bike just feels that little bit easier to chuck around, maneuver around the trail, and being a rigid bike, that is actually really useful to pick them smoother lines. Now, it's not that when this bike had 3-inch tyres, it wasn't fun. Just different. The bigger tyres did mean you didn't have to worry as much about finding them smoothest lines, but you could get a bit lazy and just roll over most things. But the bigger tyre did feel that little slower to navigate around the technical trails. There is probably a few reasons for this. Maybe it's less rubber on the trails, or maybe the weight saving, which is around 500 grams, but with the change in handling on this bike, it did play a part in the decision to change away from the Jones H-bar to the Sonda looped bar, a more traditional mountain bike riser bar. With the bike feeling a bit more playful, I wanted to try a bit more of a traditional shaped bar to get the most out of that newfound playfulness that the smaller tyres have brought to the Bombtrack. With the newfound playfulness of this bike, how has that affected the speed of this bike? Well, this one is actually really hard for me to answer, as my rides are very stop and start with the nature of filming these rides. However, I would say that if there is any increase or decrease in speeds, it is very small and honestly not really noticeable. There is going to be times where the bigger tyre is faster, then other times where it is just slower. I would say the only time I can ever notice a very slight difference of maybe like 1 miles per hour is if I'm just riding on a section of road. The smaller tyres are perhaps slightly easier to hold a higher speed. Again, that could purely be the weight savings, the faster rolling tyres, or even the weather. Off-road though, if there is any speed benefit or speed decline, then it's so small that over the course of multiple days and all the different types of trails, I cannot feel the difference. This might surprise some of you thinking that the smaller tyres would be faster or slower, but ultimately there's just not enough in it, and the trails and the weather play different roles in the overall speed. I can't say one is faster than the other, but I will say that the extra mud clearance has kept me riding while I might not have been on the bigger tyres. A big reason I wanted to switch the rims and tyres to a more standard size, or at least closer to the more common sizes in the mountain bike world, was ease of replacing them tyres, whether that be while out on the trails or when the time comes just to replace them. Luckily, I have not needed to replace either tyre out on the trails, although I did recently replace the rear one after I noticed some damage to the sidewall and the tread wearing out. That's why there is a Maxxis Recon in 2.6 on the rear at the moment. With the type of riding I like to do, I like to know that the parts that I am riding are generally quite standard and easily replaceable. And although you can still get your hands on the 29 by 3 inch tyres, they are few and far between, and there is normally a price to pay for that. Having gone with the 2.6 inch tyres, I am more at ease with it if I need to replace these, that it would be much more possible to find a replacement on the trails. Hopefully I won't ever need to, but if it can go wrong, it probably will go wrong at some point, so it gives me that peace of mind when riding that I have options while out on the trails. The more options, the better. So after a year of riding this new setup on the Bombtrack Beyond Not So Plus bike, I got to say it was the right decision. The bike feels fun, and I like that I have the peace of mind that I can replace the tyres for more options, but ultimately the biggest plus for me is that mud clearance. Personally, I think the Bombtrack is actually a better bike with the 2.6 inch tyres over the 3 inch tyres that actually come with it. So there we have it. That is the roundup, overview, review type video of the Bombtrack Not So Plus bike after a year of riding it with the 2.6 inch tyres. I hope you found this video useful, and until next time, keep smiling, enjoy the adventure. Peace.